Thank you. Our second question, and we'll start with Ted. How will you address the issue of climate change? What are your views regarding the Green New Deal, and what else can be done?
Fantastic, great question. Look at what I've done, and you will know where I stand on these issues. Can you hear me now? When I first moved to Atlanta, I actually worked as a canvasser for the Georgia Sierra Club, knocking on doors in Buckhead, Atlanta, raising money for the Sierra Club and collecting signatures for this crazy idea called the Beltline. People at the time thought that it was going to bring crime and unsavory people to their neighborhoods. But we knew that it was an effort to not only create a more walkable Atlanta, but also take more cars off the road, which are causing global warming and climate change. I actually was arrested one day knocking on doors. Spent 9 hours in Atlanta jail, and back in 2006, Atlanta jail was like kind of sketchy. It's gotten a lot better now. But I got bailed out at 2 a.m. and we went right back out to that same neighborhood the next day because we weren't going to let anything stop us. The last 3 years, I've served as the Georgia Sierra Club director. I started off there in 2016, right at the beginning of the Georgia Power Public Service Commission Integrated Resource Plan, the 20-year energy plan that's updated every 3 years for Georgia Power to decide how they're going to invest in their energy portfolio. We were successful in fighting for 1.2 gigawatts of new solar during that IRP. I took the Georgia Sierra Club from an organization with a $200,000 budget and 2 other staff members in 2016 to 2018 to $891,000 budget. We played in the elections. We had voter outreach, voter engagement, and just this last July, the 2019 Integrated Resource Plan, working with a coalition of environmental groups, were successful in lobbying the Public Service Commission event to expand solar energy in Georgia for the next 3 years to over 2 gigawatts of new solar. This is an issue that we can win on, not just in Metro Atlanta, but also in rural Georgia. I'm supporting a Green New Deal because it's going to bring jobs, economic investment, not just to places in Atlanta in terms of transit funding and more walkable, bikeable streets, but also solar investment, regenerative agriculture, investment to parts of Georgia that have been forgotten. The number one natural resource in Georgia is the sun. All right, we're the 3rd best potential for solar energy. We can go to every single county in Georgia and talk about Taylor County, Twiggs County, counties that had very little economic development happening, but when Georgia Power and the Public Service Commission and groups like the Sierra Club were advocating for more investment in their community, it brought jobs, it brought value to their tax base, lifting their tax revenues that funded their school systems, their hospital system, and vital services. This is a message we can take to all 159 counties, and that's what I intend to do. Thank you.
Some of you may know this, but I have 2 daughters. I have a 6.5-year-old and an 8.5-year-old. And as we were traveling the state after the election last year to talk about voting security, election security, voting rights, my daughter and I had an interesting conversation about what the world would look like in 2050. So in 2050, my oldest daughter will be my age. And it was an interesting conversation. Her vision was that everybody would have health care. So we're doing something right on the parenting front, right? What concerns me is that in 2050, the United Nations has told us that perhaps the leading cause of death around the world will be lack of access to clean water. Yeah, you didn't mishear that. So just take a look at all of you who have the glass of water that came with your meal or your drink tonight on the table, and we don't think anything about that. But the reality is, by the time my oldest daughter is my age, when Sophia's my age, that may well be the number one threat of mortality around the world. So the reality is, we have got to take swift and bold and decisive action to save this planet, to save clean air and clean water, to protect our agricultural industry, the largest economic sector in the state of Georgia. But to do that, here's the number one thing you need from a U.S. senator. You need a senator that will stand up for my kids and your kids and all the other children's future of our environment. Right now, this Senate does not check the actions of the President or Mitch McConnell. They are allowing polluters to pollute our watersheds all over this country. They're denying climate change. They are getting rid of scientific evidence in policymaking. And tell me one time that David Perdue has done anything to stop it. Can anyone think of anything?
Never.
That's a problem. Because see, there's no planet B. This is all we have. And if we want to do it right, you're in that Senate to do a job. It's no different than when I go in and run a trucking company or any other job. Anybody in here steadfastly refuse to do your job and then expect to keep it? Only David Perdue does that. Yeah, and Donald Trump, here. There we go. The reality is we have to do two things. You need a senator who will stand up for your kids' future and for environmental justice, because here's the thing, guys. These environmental issues disproportionately impact the impoverished. They disproportionately impact the people who need the most help and in communities of color, and we need to do something about it. They need to take bold action and serve as a check. Look, if we can do this in a 90-year-old trucking company, we couldn't afford to replace all of our trucks with more fuel-efficient things, vehicles. So you know what we did? We used math. For those of you who know me, I'm a huge math nerd. We created an algorithm to more efficiently route our trucks through the networks, and we saved hundreds of thousands of miles in emissions. If we can do that in a trucking company, the U.S. Senate has no excuse, y'all. Thanks so much.
This unfolding environmental crisis, predictions of catastrophic climate change, mass extinction, plastic waste, it is literally snowing plastic in the Arctic. Our bodies are so poisoned by plastic, we can't even measure the effects because there's no control group. We can't find people who aren't poisoned by plastic. This environmental crisis is perhaps the single greatest challenge that humanity has ever faced. Because not only are we up against a powerful, multi-trillion-dollar industry that has been spreading denialist propaganda for decades in the face of overwhelming scientific evidence, that has used its financial power and its influence to buy our elected officials and prevent them from taking action on our behalf and on behalf of future generations. Not only that, this is not something that one nation alone can solve. Even if the United States were to cut our emissions to zero tomorrow, unless we could bring the rest of the world along by exporting our technology, by entering into multilateral agreements that hold other nations to similar standards, still, the concentrations in the atmosphere of greenhouse gases will be too high to forestall the worst predictions of the IPCC, which is the UN's agency that assesses climate change and climate change risk. We've been talking about corruption, all of us. I've been talking about corruption. And Sarah made this point. When the federal government is silencing its own environmental scientists and erasing their findings from the internet because it threatens this president's patrons in the fossil fuel industry, that is corruption. That is corruption. And when this industry spends so much money trying to persuade us that there's nothing to worry about, when there is an overwhelming scientific consensus that the risks are grave, that time is running out, that is corruption. It must be confronted, and it's also a tremendous opportunity. And I commend those who are elevating the issue of solving this environmental crisis and linking it to the opportunities to invest in our infrastructure, in clean energy, in transit, in high-tech and new modes of transportation, in resilient communities, in sustainable agriculture. Because we need to give people a sense of where we're headed. I don't want to live in a world dominated by totalitarian regimes and right-wing extremists and nationalists who are funded by their patrons in business, who divide us, who make us afraid of one another. I want to live on a clean, beautiful, healthy planet. I want to live on a clean, beautiful, healthy planet in peace with other nations. We can make that happen. It starts with winning this election here in Georgia. Thank you.
The
first scholarly article connecting the production of carbon and the temperature of the Earth was in 1896. We have eaten up a lot of runway, folks. We have lost the opportunity to be moderate about the solutions we need to come up with. And so the Green New Deal doesn't shock me. It doesn't scare me. We need all of the bold ideas that we can get at this time because the climate deniers have lost us the opportunity to do this in any sort of moderate way. And so we have a climate crisis on our hands. We're already paying for it. Don't let our Republican neighbors and Republican pundits tell us that we can't afford to invest in our future. We just need leaders in the United States Senate who are willing to grab the 21st century with both hands and see this as an opportunity to create hundreds of thousands of jobs by investing in infrastructure such as a clean energy grid that can see how we can harness the wind and the sun to fuel our energy and our vibrancy of our communities, to rethink our transportation systems. And so when I was the mayor of Columbus, Georgia, on a local level, we did these things in a profound way. We created 66 miles of alternative transportation system interconnected. So in some parts of Columbus, you don't have to own a car to get around. That system will be built on, and Columbus will be ready to grab the future. We also had an underground fuel tank farm that was owned by the state and serviced by a private corporation. It had layers and layers of dysfunction and complexity to it. But with strong leadership, we were able to get rid of that tank farm that sat on the Chattahoochee River that could have contaminated the water source for millions of people. Folks, you think we have immigration challenges right now? You wait. If we don't address this climate crisis in a meaningful, bold, and immediate way, the world will be changed in a fashion that we can't even fathom right now, and migration will be one of the #1 threats to civic stability. We don't have time to waste. We need leaders who are bold, who have the experience to lead, who have actually changed systems to make them work for the Georgian people, from the American people. And we have no time to waste.